Guess who just got a haircut? And I feel weak all over. Okay, not really, but it got me thinking about, well, you can guess which Bible character. But did you know the secret to Samson's strength was not in his hair? We're going to do some myth busting and correct some misnomers and misunderstandings about the life of Samson and especially his relationship with Delilah on this episode of Black Sheep Bible Study. It's a place of grace for those of us who need a fresh start and a second chance, like Samson. Did you ever get a really bad haircut? Well, I'll bet it wasn't as bad as this guy's. But there's a lot for us to cover before we get to the worst haircut in history. I did a deep dive into Samson's life, and my goodness, this guy was a hot mess. He definitely qualifies for the Black Sheep Hall of Fame. If Samson's life had to be qualified in a literary genre, it wouldn't be an adventure or a fantasy or a romance. It would be a tragedy. Definitely a cautionary tale from start to finish. He's less of a hero and more of an anti-hero. Think less Captain America and more Deadpool. He's somebody who gets the job done eventually, but he's not someone you want to emulate. He's not a role model. Physically, Samson is the strongest man to ever live. Morally, he's one of the weakest. There's one Bible verse in the New Testament that kind of sums up his life. James, the brother of Jesus, says, "Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own desire and enticed." Okay, don't blame what's out there. Take responsibility. Each one is tempted when they're dragged away by their own desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. When we give in to our own selfish desires, it's like we give birth to something that's going to grow up and come back to ruin our lives. Don't I know it? And Samson, he gave birth to a lot of sin. So we need to take 4 episodes to cover the disastrous life of Samson. In this episode, The Worst Haircut Ever, we'll look at Samson and Delilah. We're really looking at the end of his life first. Then in part 2, was Samson a sociopath? We're going to look at the psychology of Samson. And then part 3, God behind the scenes, we'll look at how God works through bad events and weak people. And then lastly, part 4, Samson and Jesus. We'll look at parallels in the life of Samson, the life of Christ, that really point to a better way. But through the whole thing, our aim is to be an encouragement to people who feel like black sheep on the outside looking in. There is encouragement here for all of us. Because here's the weird thing. In the New Testament book of Hebrews, chapter 11, where there is the Hall of Faith, where the writer kind of parades all the names of the Old Testament saints that really should be an encouragement to us because of their strong faith, Samson's on that list. It means that somehow God works with just the faith the size of a mustard seed, even though it's surrounded by disastrous failure. And he works with that and says, yeah, all right, you're in. That's encouraging. So for this episode, we're going to first look at the context and then the text, which will be Judges chapter 16. Then we'll look at some observations and finally applications for our lives. Well, we've got lots to cover, and just so you know, I'm going to go at a fairly brisk pace, knowing that you can always, once you get to the end, come back to any part you want to rewatch or pause and do your own Bible study and dig deeper. Okay, first of all, the context. Joshua was dead to begin with. Judges 2:10 says, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, that's Joshua and his generation, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. My goodness, it only takes one generation for any society, culture, or faith group to go through a massive identity loss. The book of Judges and that time period is sandwiched between the time of Moses and Joshua. Moses led Israel out of Egypt, and then Joshua led them into the promised land on the one end, and on the other end, the time of the kings like Saul and David and Solomon. Judges is the season where Israel is struggling to figure out who they are because they've really forgotten the whole Torah that was given to them through Moses. And so judges are appointed. That's what they're called, singular rulers over the nation who are supernaturally gifted. And twice, near the end of the book of Judges, we read, in those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. Israel engages in a sin spiral. Not really a sin cycle. It doesn't just go around, it goes around and down. So, because they've forgotten the Torah, they sin. And God brings consequence. And when he brings consequence, they repent. And when they repent, God then brings rescue, redemption, revival, and they become complacent. Hey, everything's good. And then they sin again. The book of Judges records 12 judges before Samson. He's the 13th, he's the last, and he's the worst. Samson is the most selfish, impetuous, impulse-driven, temper tantrum-throwing man-baby in the whole Bible. And yet, somehow, God still uses him. There's hope for all of us. God gave Samson a gift of supernatural strength, which tells me that God gifts people, not performance. He gifts calling, not character. We can have a gift from God and use it for God's glory, or we can misuse it and hurt people in the process. Okay, let's move on. That's far too convicting. Continuing with the context, before we get to our text in Judges 16, let's rewind a bit to Judges 13, where we get the origin story of Samson. An angel appears to his mom, tells her about this special birth that's going to happen, and says he needs to be raised as a Nazirite. What's a Nazirite? Well, we learned back in the Torah, which Israel had forgotten about at this time, that there was a vow you could make to God to be completely dedicated to him, usually for a temporary period of time, but this angel says for Samson, it's going to be his whole life. And some of the marks of this dedication, being wholly dedicated to God, were that they had to keep the entire Torah, but that was true for every Israelite. And on top of that, there were 3 qualifications or 3 signs that you were fully dedicated and needed to maintain. Number 1, no touching dead things. Number 2, no drinking wine or even eating a grape. And number 3, no cutting your hair. And Samson seems to live the opposite of this. He doesn't keep the Torah to begin with. He breaks a number of Torah laws, but on top of that, his Nazirite vows, one by one, he breaks them. First of all, there's the honey lion story. It's like a honey badger, but more violent. The text says he's walking through a vineyard, which itself is emblematic of him having a disregard for his Nazirite vow. And he's attacked by a lion. He kills the lion. And then sometime later, he passes that way again. He looks, he finds the corpse of the lion that he killed. And in its remains, bees have created I was going to say nest, but bees don't make a nest. They make a hive. There's a hive in like the rib cage of the dead lion. And so he scoops out some honey because he wants it. But remember the Nazirite vow, he's not supposed to touch a dead thing. Oops, strike one. Then he goes to a feast. He gets married to a woman who's a Philistine, breaking Torah, but he goes to the feast, and the Hebrew word for feasting means a drinking party. Samson drinks. So, strike 2. You can understand that by the time it gets to the haircut, it's not really about the hair. It's the final Nazirite vow that he breaks. He's been living his whole life with a disregard for God's call upon his life. All right, that's the context. Let's zoom into the text. Judges chapter 16, where we find the ultimate toxic relationship case study. Sometime later, Samson was in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So the Valley of Sorek, that was another vineyard area. Again, emblematic of Samson kind of setting up his home in the middle of where he shouldn't be if he wants to resist temptation and maintain his Nazirite vow. The Valley of Sorek was between Israel and Philistia. It separated the 2 territories. And that's kind of where Samson hangs out. Is he fully Jewish? Yes, but he wants to blend and bond with the Philistine culture. He always seems to be drawn to their way of living. Also notice that the text says Samson loved Delilah. It's the first mention of love in the life of Samson. It doesn't say he loved his parents or loved his friends, loved his former wife or a prostitute or anybody in his life. But this time, the first time, says he loved Delilah. Also notice it doesn't say that Delilah was alluring to him because of how she looked. It doesn't mention how she looked. I think we may have Delilah wrong in some of our imagery. She was not so much a sexy seductress as she became the person later in life he finally goes to find safety and security, and he falls in love with her. Samson's problem at this stage is not lust, it's love, and the weakness that creates in their power dynamic. As we work our way through Judges chapter 16, we find out that Delilah is less of a seductress and more of a psychological interrogator. She pesters him regularly because she wants the money from the Philistine rulers. She says, "Tell me the secret of your strength, please." He says, "No, but no, really, tell me." So, okay, he makes up a story. He says ridiculous things. "If you tie me up, but with bowstrings, then my strength will disappear." So he wakes up one day to her saying, "Samson, the Philistines are upon us." And he breaks the bowstrings and realizes, hey, wait a second. You did the thing that, She says, "Why'd you lie to me? You must not love me. Tell me, what's the secret to your strength?" So he says, he makes something else up. "If you tie me up with brand new ropes that have never been used for any other purpose, that'll take away my strength." Then he wakes up one day to her yelling, "Samson, wake up, the Philistines are upon us." And he breaks the ropes and realizes, hold on a second, you just did, And then she pesters him some more. "You must not love me if you won't tell me the truth." He makes up one final story. He says, "If you take the 7 braids of my hair," that seems to be how his hair was fashioned, "and you weave them into a loom," okay, now he's just getting silly, "then that will take away my strength." He wakes up one night to her yelling, "Samson, the Philistines are upon us," and lo and behold, his hair is woven into the loom, but he yanks it out and he's ready to go. So Samson is like, wait a second, this is now you. Then we pick up the story here. Then she, Delilah, said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. Why, Samson, why? It's obvious what Delilah is doing. Why did you tell her? Well, in the end, Samson tells her not because he was tempted, but because he was tired. Yeah, Samson was the strongest man who ever lived, but in the end, Delilah was stronger. Yes, Samson had the power of his physical strength. He also had the power of his position. He was the ruler of Israel at the time, the judge of that generation. But Delilah had the power of a persistent personality. The power of assertiveness and persistence is a massive force that can move mountains and get things done for good or for ill. If you're a persistent person, if you have assertiveness, hey, that's great. You can use that to accomplish good things. But watch out that you don't dominate, that you don't steamroll over someone else. You can get people to do stuff, and in the end, it's not really the best choice that they could make for themselves. If you have this gift, steward it well, steward it wisely, steward it lovingly. Moving on, the text says that Delilah discerns that Samson really has told her the truth this time. So the text reads, when Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to come and shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him. And his strength left him. Samson had survived a lion attack, but he could not survive a nap on the wrong lap. So as we read on, we read, "Then she called, 'Samson, the Philistines are upon you.' He awoke from his sleep and thought, 'I'll go out as before and shake myself free.' But he did not know that the Lord had left him." This is probably the saddest verse in the whole life of Samson. He loses God's blessing, but not God's love. We never lose God's love. In fact, God will come back to bless Samson again. But for now, there's consequence for his sin. But notice it's not even just one bad decision. It is continual boundary erosion. One by one, Samson has been casting aside his Nazirite vow. It's not just about the haircut. For Samson, it's not the one decision that ruins it all. It's kind of the frog in the kettle thing, which, by the way, is a myth. Don't try this at home. If you put a frog in cold water and slowly raise the temperature, it will hop out. If you put a frog in boiling water, it will die. The whole frog in the kettle thing makes no sense, but it is a handy image for what happened to Samson. So the Philistines capture Samson. They take him back into their territory in Philistia, and they gouge out his eyes, and they make him a slave, along with the other animals grinding their grain. And then one day they decide to have a big celebration and make Samson the central spectacle. And we read, "Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, 'Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands.' When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, 'Our God has delivered the enemy into our hands.'" Hey, just something to note here. Every time Samson has the victory, when he slays Philistines, when he wins a battle, it never records him praising God. It never records him thanking God. It never records him giving God credit. In fact, it does record him writing himself a poem about how awesome he is. We'll talk about that in a future episode when we look at the psychology of Samson. God never gets any credit from Samson at all. Here we read that the Philistines actually praise their god, Dagon. Wrong god, but the right attitude. I think there's a lesson here for us. We'll get to it shortly. What they do when they bring Samson out to be the centerpiece of their celebration, to mock him, they put him in the middle of it all. He's being led around by a boy, again, emblematic that this strong man has now been tamed. And he asks the boy, "Lead me to the central pillars of the temple." The text says there's about 3,000 people there that day. And Samson puts his hands on the pillars and between them, and he pushes and pushes. We read, "Then Samson prayed to the Lord, 'Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, eventually fulfill my calling so that you get the glory.'" No, even his final prayer. "With one blow, I want to get revenge on the Philistine for my 2 eyes." It's a selfish prayer, but God still listens. It really doesn't take much for God. We don't have to find the exact right words or make sure our heart is in exactly the right place. God wants to talk, and he wants to respond to the cries of our heart. This tells me that no matter how much we've screwed up, God is just one prayer away. And then we read, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Again, about 3,000. Thus, he killed many more when he died than while he lived. All right, we've looked at the text and the context. What are some observations? Let's review some of the things that we have seen and noticed. The writer wants us to learn from non-believers. Hey, just like Jesus does. Remember, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. It might as well have been the good Philistine. Jesus says, it doesn't matter if they don't worship in the right way. It doesn't matter if they don't know the name of the right God. It doesn't matter if you disagree with them on some fundamental issue. It doesn't matter if they're your sworn enemy. You can always take a humble learning posture towards others. God's forgiveness does not always remove consequence. Think of the life of King David. Even though Nathan the prophet tells him, God has completely forgiven you for your sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, there was still consequence, he said, that God's not going to remove from your life. If you're going through a very hard thing, some consequence for something that's gone wrong, it's not that God has abandoned you. In fact, he can use the consequence for our sin, again, to help our souls course correct and get more healthy. All right, lastly, we've looked at the context and the text and some observations. Now, applications. What are some things we can do now in light of what we've learned? Try to learn from those you oppose. One way you can do this is to try to win arguments by being the person to learn the most rather than the person to teach the most or convince the most. Be spiritually curious. Why do you believe what you believe? Ask lots of questions. That opens it up for genuine friendship, real dialogue. You can learn from the Philistines in your life, the Samaritans in your life, rather than just always trying to convince them. Humble yourself. God's got something to teach you through every conversation. Boy, wouldn't social media be different if we approached it that way? And lastly, join with others on the same spiritual journey. When you read through the life of Samson, and we'll get to this in future episodes, you'll notice that he never turns to anyone else for wise counsel. Not a spiritual leader, not a prophet. He won't listen to his own parents. He doesn't have any friends. The only time he listens to somebody else is Delilah at the end. He is basically a lone wolf, and that's not how we're designed to live. Sure, a lone wolf can survive for a while, but a lone sheep? That's a dead sheep. We're meant to live together. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. That city imagery is the coming together of various singular lights to create one larger light that shines further and brighter. So other people can be drawn to the light of Christ, not just when we're out there as individuals trying to be the light of the world, but when they are able to observe how our light comes together to create something more beautiful. Others should be able to observe the church and see how our kindness, our compassion, our grace, our mercy, our peace towards one another demonstrates the gospel, and that should become light to them. When they see how we forgive the fallen and restore those who have wandered, when we go and we find black sheep and we bring them home, this is how the gospel becomes a light to the world. In fact, at the beginning of that sentence, when it says, "You are the light of the world," the word "you" is plural. In the Greek, second person pronouns, you, can be either singular or plural. We can't do that in English, but you can do that in Greek, the original language, and it is plural. So Jesus is saying, you, plural, are the light, singular, of the world. People should look at us together and get a glimpse of Jesus. Well, that means that we actually do need to come together. So if you're a black sheep who's also a lone wolf, I want to encourage you to take the next step to find others and come together with them and begin to show grace, mercy, and peace to one another. If you don't know how to do that, look for churches in your area. If you can't find a good church, well, get in touch. You can go to 1820life.com to get more information about creating community, or come and join one of ours. Or just get in touch with me. Give me a phone call. Send me an email. All the information is in the description of this channel. You poke around, you'll find it. I believe in you. Hey, if this has been helpful, I hope you'll do two things. Number one, come back for part 2, 3, and 4. There's so much more to cover. But also, I hope you'll share this with someone who you think might benefit. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Black Sheep Bible Study.